Governor Wolf, Peter Sung with Afro-American. On the National Infrastructure Bank, that's something that Mark Warner had put on governors. The National Infrastructure Bank, that's something that was originally proposed by Mark Warner, which is like the godfather of the whole thing. Would you guys as a state just do it on your own and not wait for the federal government?
I would try. I mean, I think there are a lot of people might have other ideas, but I would.
So you would do it with Governor Hogan, make your own bank?
I think I could do it in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and how about privatizing Philadelphia Airport and Pittsburgh? I mean, there's money for it.
I gave it to the secretary. She has the red dress. There she's right there. She has it. Yeah, it's been.
No, but you would do it in Pennsylvania, so you just said, but how about a multi-state? We have now Guam, Maryland.
Sheeted it on what Pennsylvania is likely to receive and can work at the state level. But it would be nice to have it at the federal level because one of the things the states need to work together and each state has their own counterpart of that private sector. So I think it would be easier for a national infrastructure bank. You have TSAs already.
Yeah.
This would be just one more.
Why wasn't it in part of the Biden bill?
I don't know.
I mean, Warner was the one who put this in. 10-to-1 leverage, right? You would get 10-to-1 at least.
You could have less than that. The federal government borrowing money.
No, but from the private sector, every dollar you put in, you can get up to 10 from the private sector.
You could do less than that if you wanted to be safer.
So 5-to-1 or something?
Yeah, I did it at something like 2-to-1.
You did it already.
Just for Pennsylvania, that works.
So could you do it? You could do it yourself if you needed to, and then you would preferably the federal government. Because the worst part about being a governor is saying no to people. So you have like 20.
It's not that. It's the federal government. So many of these projects have an interstate component, to like the interstate highways, like the electric grid.
Yeah.
Those are federal. Those are national issues. So the National Infrastructure Bank would take that national perspective.
Yeah.
And I think in the absence of that, you could do something. But I think the public we have privatized our electric grid.
Yeah.
Electric generation. A lot of states haven't done that.
The problem is for a state like Louisiana.
Yeah.
If you had resources coming from the federal government that they allowed you to run through an infrastructure bank, that's obviously better. The funding that we're able to produce locally, and I'm not saying we can't do better because we can. In fact, we are going to do better. I'm redirecting $150 million a year from vehicle sales tax into the Transportation Trust Fund. That's something we did a year ago. But I have the third lowest gas tax in the country. All right. And it's been the same since 1988.
Yeah.
So being able to use the federal resources with ours to attract the private capital.
For example, you got $25 billion now to invest in American airports that's sitting on the, McCoy, the Arabs, everybody has that. You try to do Louis Armstrong Airport, that would bring 10-to-1 leverage back to you.
We just did a $1 billion airport, though. So the New Orleans airport is the newest, I think, they may have opened one since. It is the newest airport in the country of its size. But no, your point is well taken. But you have to think differently because Macquarie wants to be able to get a concession there.
That's what I meant. I mean, do you need to run Louis Armstrong? That's billions of dollars that go straight in your pocket. You'd have a private operator, either the Germans, whoever.
No, but I will tell you, it is something that appeals to me because I know about it.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people out there would look like they would believe that we're going to build something and give it to privates in order for them to make obscene profits, and that really isn't how we should look at it. We're going to have to educate.
Because those,
I think all those points are fair.
And you'll do that. And are you term limited like Hogan? So this is
now I have another year because they were elected first in 14. I was elected first in 15. So I get to go till the end of.
So you can make unpopular statements now that you're about to be term limit. So the new bank may be you are the board members with some going. Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Perhaps. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's what Washington is not so good at. And so, I mean, this is like the first time, and I can remember in a long, long time, that instead of just pointing fingers and arguing back and forth, that we sat down and hammered out an agreement on something really important to all of our states and to everybody in America. So I guess we ought to be working at NGA with all these smart governors about what's our next mission. You know, what else can we get done in Washington in a bipartisan way? Because I think it's really important.
I think the next thing, and it gets back to the point you made a few minutes ago, Larry, that is, how are we going to spend this? How are we going to actually allocate it in a rational way? I'd like to make a suggestion. You know, the three things that I think we need to look at. We want to get the money out fast. I know we need to be deliberate and do this right, but I think we need to, there's a real need to fix our infrastructure to address that. Second thing is we need to make sure we avoid the traditional political gamesmanship that goes on in allocations of funds. We don't want to do a lot of bridges to nowhere. We don't want to make decisions on allocating resources based on projects whose sole virtue is that they happen to be near very powerful politicians' home. And the final thing, I think we want to make sure that we do something that is sustainable. This is 5 to 10 years. That's a long time. You and I are both in our last years as governor of our state, but 10 years is not a long time in the life of a state. And so we've got to figure out how the money that we're investing here survives this 5 to 10 year period. We may not be this lucky again, maybe another 4 decades before the federal government steps up. So we need that. We also need to figure out ways, I think, to attract other dollars. People talked earlier about public-private partnerships. We're going to be getting a lot of money. We're all getting a lot of money from this, but it's not an infinite amount of money, and it's not nearly what the engineers are saying we need to address our infrastructure gaps. So we need some way that we can attract private sector money to augment what we've gotten from the federal government here. So I propose something that looks like a special purpose authority that most states, not all states, have set up in one way or another, that serves sort of like an infrastructure bank, where you can actually pool the resources that you have, the human resources, the expertise you need, but also use the money that comes from the federal government to leverage other money, so that you have this money into the future. I've spreadsheeted something like this because this is the kind of thing I'm not doing. And a state like Pennsylvania could actually generate hundreds of millions of dollars each year in their practice by just doing very, I think, important projects. A bank like this would have a board that would actually make the projects accountable. They'd have to work. They couldn't be bridges to nowhere. They'd have to be bridges to somewhere. And I think it's the kind of thing that within a very short time we could actually become self-sufficient. And we could actually look at infrastructure as something that would survive this really good bill.
I totally agree with Tom in the issue of sustainability. I think implementation, I think we've got implementation down pat, right? Public-private partnership, working with other people, collaborating, cooperative, communicating, relationships, and so forth. But I think the harder part, at least for our island, is how do we sustain it? And not just sustain, but how do we become more self-sufficient? So we're not so much dependent on, like you said, maybe 10 years from now, we may not get the federal monies or the help. And so what we're doing in Guam is, I like your bank idea too. But what we're doing in Guam is I've formed an economic diversification commission. And what we're doing is we're looking at, okay, so we're here located geographically. We are the first line of national security defense. We have a lot of military activities in Guam. We have a lot of construction going on in Guam. So that's a source of economic revenues, new revenues. But more importantly is we are geographically located where we can take advantages of the need for a redundant telecommunications in the world. So Asia goes up north to the United States. they're looking now for an alternative source, which is going to be redundancy. And so we're saying Guam is the place. First of all, I think our laws are in order. We are a stable government. We are connected very much to the United States. The standards of practice are very good. And so we are, actually we have a lot of landing cables now coming from Asia. So we're trying to also stand up a very robust data warehousing data center. We're trying to attract Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon to use us as their tool and their avenue and conduit. Additive manufacturing, that's one thing that we are really pursuing because of our very fragile supply chain, and also the military is there. So with additive manufacturing, they can establish the parts right there. I've never seen that, Larry. They say you can build a house with additive manufacturing. And so we're working with companies that would be interested to come to Guam to work on. My point is, I think we need to be very creative and innovative in economic attraction and diversification of industries. The other thing that's my biggest pet peeve is aquaculture. I want Guam to be the center of aquaculture. There are billions of money in that industry. And we would get food security if we do that. Then we would be self-sustained in terms of economic stabilization and economic solidification for our sufficiency.
And Governor, you would see, I think, potential in the bill to advance some of those goals.
Yes, I like the past, gave me a really good idea, the past panel, when they said, take what it says there and make your program so it meets that. Oh, okay, aquaculture decreases carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. We don't have manufacturers to make up all these products. We don't emit emission into the air, so aquaculture, I think, will fit into the carbon dioxide eligibility.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah.
Governor, let's talk a little bit about the resiliency and so forth. I know, as you mentioned, that's such a challenge for your state. Do you see some potential here, and how might you be thinking about
that? We absolutely do. So we have, without a doubt, the most robust science-based climate adaptation program anywhere in the country, where we're investing a minimum of $50 billion over 50 years to do projects that both restore the coast but also offer more protection. And I gave you the bad news a while ago with land loss. The good news is when the projects are completed, that are already completed, those that are under design, those in construction, for the first time in decades, we will be building more land in Louisiana than we're losing. But you have to have the resources to make that happen. And it's not just money, you got to have the workforce, and it has to be science-based and all of these things. But the resiliency component is all about that. The other thing is, we know that this works. Hurricane Ida took a very similar path to Hurricane Katrina. It was stronger than Hurricane Katrina. You didn't see all of the things around New Orleans that you saw with Hurricane Katrina because of the infrastructure investments that have happened since then. Very generous, and we thank you all. Over $14 billion for the most complex set of levees and floodgates and pumps and you name it. But we know that they work, right? I mean, it's not just theoretical anymore. That absolutely works. And those protection systems are needed in more areas, and they're already being built across South Louisiana. And so the emphasis on resiliency, I think, is spot on from our perspective. What can we do to make sure that the lights don't go out? And if they do go out, that we get them back on quicker. And it's not just about your comfort with air conditioning, although that's important in South Louisiana when these hurricanes hit in August. But when you have hospitals that can't stay open because they're their water systems fail, or they've already received damage themselves, and then they lose power. And oh, by the way, the last 2 years, they were full with COVID patients. And so making that whole system more resilient. There's a lesson to be learned. There was a part of New Orleans that never lost power. It's got a microgrid that's fueled by solar. Never lost its power. So, we have to do more things like this. Some of this will be available to us because of this bill. Hopefully, other parts of that will come later, but incredibly important for us. And while we may be the canary in the coal mine, these problems are going all around the country, all over the East Coast, the West Coast, and I think we're going to have an exportable commodity with the experience and the expertise that we're developing in Louisiana now as we deal with these challenges.
They spoke earlier about the reports that go to Congress, and I think one of them has to do with best practices. I've heard some best practices already up here. I mean, this is terrific, what you're doing in these states.
I just want to follow up on Governor Wolf's comment about private sector investment. I think that's critically important. It's something that we're big believers in, that we've been doing in Maryland for 7 years. But it was also a big part of our NGA infrastructure initiative in the summits that we held around the country. And we also did them in Australia, where they do a really good job of utilizing P3's private sector investment to get big infrastructure projects done. I think they had a unique part of it. We were talking about infrastructure banks, but just the whole idea that there really are, in addition to this federal money, an almost unlimited amount of investment dollars that wants to invest in infrastructure projects that we need to leverage and capitalize on, and use this as a catalyst to do even more. That's not just relying on taxpayers' money. And we've done that here. We talked a little bit earlier about, we have a public-private partnership at Port of Baltimore to help us stretch the port. That's helping us increase productivity and put people to work. We're doing a public-private partnership on the Purple Line, which is the largest light rail project tying in the Metro Washington area. We're doing a public-private.
That's why you wore that tie, right?
That's why this is the Raiders tie. But it's also the Purple Line. It's the NJ colors. And bringing red and blue together. But yeah, on our highway, we're connecting with Virginia and the Capitol Beltway. That's public-private partnership. There's investment dollars coming in from the private sector, and there's money. Australia does a ton of this, or Canada does a ton of it. There are other countries in South America that do it. We're not doing a good job of leveraging private sector investment. It's one of the major emphases that we put in the NGA Chairs Initiative, and it was in our recommendations to Congress, and it is. There is P3 wording in this final bill, which there was not before. So I think that was one where we sort of had disagreement, where I think it was some more of the Republican colleagues were saying they believed in private sector investment. Some of my Democratic friends were saying you should be using federally. We should be doing both. And I think that's where we all came down to. And now a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, like Governor Wolf, are saying, yeah, we should tap into that.